Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, for the opportunity to speak to the 2022 whistleblower bill. I had intended, Madam Speaker, when I got to the close of the few remarks I wish to make this afternoon, to spend a little time speaking to the obstructionist policy and disposition of the United National Congress opposition. And it had been my intention in closing to ask your leave to read into the record a certain document, because that document is important to this government to demonstrate the concerted efforts that it has been making to get this opposition meaningfully to engage in the business of legislators in order to pass legislation for the welfare of the citizenry of this people of this country. Because that is why we are here. We are here in the trust of the persons who have elected the government and the opposition, that their interests will be legitimately served by the parliamentarians who represent them in this honorable House. And we on this side, Madam Speaker, we take that responsibility solemnly and very seriously. But I ask your leave to put at the opening, as opposed to the close, the document that I was going to read. A letter on the letterhead of the Prime Minister of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, dated the 12th of October, 2023. This was when we were trying to get the opposition to do their job responsibly, to meet with the government in order, out of the glare of the cameras, when we could not resist, the opposition cannot resist the gallerying and the playing to the public and the spectacle of distraction, and worse yet, which I have witnessed in this House this evening, the spectacle of abusing the privileges of this House to rise to one's own defense in matters that are before the courts. We wrote, the Honorable Prime Minister wrote to the Leader of the Opposition a letter dated the 12th of October, 2023. And I will read with your leave certain parts of that letter, Madam Speaker. Dear Mrs. Persad-Bissessar, I refer to my letter to you dated September 16th, 2023, to which you responded in part by yours of September 26, 2023. I write now to propose the government's parliamentary team and subject list for discussion to address the safety and security of the population of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. The Honorable Prime Minister then set out the names of 5 members of Parliament who would consist of the government team, and he says, I invite you to name your team of 4 parliamentarians to join with government to enable the work to commence immediately after the budget debate. And this is the very relevant part of the letter, which is germane to the business that we are about today. The government proposes to prioritize the following for discussion, which I emphasize is not exhaustive. Let me pause there with the Prime Minister's leave to interpret that. Which I emphasize is not exhaustive. In other words, what I list next is not the complete list, because we will invite you to add, and we may have others to add as well. But we are inviting you to meet with us to discuss the following. 1, Firearms Control Bill 2023. 2, bail. 3, interception of communications. 4, anti-gang. 5, whistleblower protection. The very bill that we are discussing here today, and the Prime Minister continued down to Roman numeral 12. That many other matters. The government proposes that the team will have the option on a majority vote to co-opt the right of citizens by way of memoranda and/or consultation. I look forward to your timely response. Yours faithfully, Keith Christopher Rowley, PhD, MP. That was the letter written by the Honorable Prime Minister to the Leader of the Opposition, inviting the opposition to engage in a sane, mature discussion to avoid the travesty that we have just witnessed in this House on precisely one of those subjects. And why do I say travesty, which we have just witnessed? The Honourable Member for Oropouche East, who has taken his leave, spoke for 40 minutes or thereabouts on a number of things, much of which demonstrated the need for whistleblower protection, because he was speaking about the fact that people would need protection, people would be nervous, etc. That's the very point that we are here about. But he said something very interesting. He said, I am going to speak on the EMBD matter. And I was astounded. He went on to say that he anticipated that he would be under flashing blue lights, which was even more remarkable. And then proceeded to provide this House, by way of abuse of privilege, with his personal defense in the very matter. Madam Speaker, I'm going to read, and I am doing this in response to the member, because it is not correct that our privileges in this House should be so abused. I'm going to read one paragraph out of a judgment of Mr. Justice James Aboud. It is the EMBD's case, paragraph 3, judgment dated the 6th of August, 2020. It is EMBD's case that the three claimants in the consolidating action, being contracting companies...
Madam Speaker, I rise on Standing Order 49. One, is this an ongoing matter in the courts of Trinidad and Tobago?
Are you asking or you're saying?
I am seeking clarification.
But if you're rising on that, are you saying it is?
Madam Speaker, I rise on 49.1.
So, Attorney General, you are aware if it is a matter that is subject
I am aware of what the member for Oropouche East spoke about, and I am replying to the member because I think it is right and correct that the proper context and the record should be accurately stated in this House, and not by way of an abuse of privilege, because the member spoke to the fact.
Madam Speaker, I rise on 49 again. The Attorney General cannot determine an abuse of privileges in this House. That is your responsibility.
All right, so, AG, again, if the matter is sub judice, you know the rule, okay? No one before mentioned that if the member is saying it is sub judice, then we guided by what Standing Order 49 says, okay?
Madam, I respond to the member through you and in relation to what you've just said to make 3 points. First, and I was very deliberate to identify the fact that the member for Oropouche East spoke to a matter, he raised it, and he's referred to the EMBD case. Secondly, there is no jury involved in this that could be influenced by anything that I am about to say. And thirdly, I think it is appropriate for this House as a matter of record to allow the record to be stated correctly so that what has been put on the record unanswered does not influence the listening public into thinking that the EMBD case is some PNM case. And I wish, therefore, to reply. I'm not going to comment other than to read one passage out of the judgment. Beyond that, I do not comment.
I will cautiously listen and determine if you need to be stopped. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. It is EMBD's case that the three claimants in the consolidated action, being contracting companies who won lucrative awards in the run-up to the 2015 general election, and all the defendants in the related action, three of whom are similarly circumstanced contracting companies, one of whom is a former minister of government, and three of whom are former senior officers of EMBD, are guilty of a number of very serious acts of dishonesty. EMBD intends to prove at the trial that these parties were knowingly involved in a number of tortious acts.
I rise on Standing Order 49, 48, 6 and 48, 8, please, Madam Speaker. This is in relation to the conduct of a particular member that the Attorney General is referring to, and also this matter is sub judice.
So, again, on the ruling with respect to sub judice, that point was raised just now. I'm saying I'm going to hear what the Attorney General says, not because the matter is in court means you can't refer to it, but it's whether it's going into any substance, whether it is before a jury, whether it can prejudice the outcome. I haven't heard anything as yet that offends that. And again, this is in response to something that was said, and you said the other thing is what, 48.6? Again, this is one imputing improper motives. I rule against that. Please continue.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. So if I were to continue reading where I was, EMBD intends to prove at the trial that these parties were knowingly involved in a number of tortious acts, including unlawful means conspiracy, bribery, and dishonest assistant. EMBD also claims relief in contract law, for example, declarations that the contracts are void for illegality. That is paragraph 2 of the judgment of Mr. Justice James Abood, dated the 6th of August 2020, and one of the named defendants in this matter is a gentleman, the first named defendant, Rudal Munilal. I say no more. I say no more, Madam Speaker, on that subject, other than to say that I was truly saddened by the fact that the member for Urupush East used the opportunity of this debate on the whistleblower bill under parliamentary privilege to speak to a matter in which he is personally involved and thereby abuse the privileges of this House. Madam Speaker, this bill has been in different manifestations before this Parliament for some time. And I will speak in some detail to that in due course, but if I may be allowed to speak to the matter at hand. This is a piece of legislation, and indeed the very remarks of the member for Urupush East demonstrated the necessity for it, that is intended to provide for a climate of transparency, accountability, and integrity to prevent organizational corruption within the public and the private sectors. Madam Speaker, it is the government's intention through this piece of legislation, and that piece of legislation has been before this House for some time now, to provide a sound legislative framework to encourage the reporting of misconduct, fraud, and corruption. Well thought through legislation to protect the persons who make such reports so that they cannot be easily subject to acts of retaliation. The risk of corruption increases in this society exponentially, Madam Speaker, where reporting is not facilitated, not protected, and in the absence of legislative safeguards that can dissuade witnesses to corruption from stepping forward. Madam Speaker, relevant to the government's continuing drive to raise the bar of ethical conduct in the public and private sector of this country, only on Monday of this week, the Office of the Attorney General and Ministry of Legal Affairs, of which I am privileged to lead, in collaboration with the World Bank Group, co-hosted a pivotally important anti-money laundering, Countering the Financing of Terrorism National Risk Assessment Workshop. And in delivering the opening remarks at that workshop, this is what I said, among other things. That was on Monday of this week. The challenges posed by money laundering and the financing of terrorism represent real threats to our national security, economic and financial stability, and maintaining the rule of law. As guardians of justice and the stewards of public trust, it is incumbent upon all of us to confront these threats with unwavering resolve and collective action to protect the financial system and the broader economy from the threats of illicit finance. Illicit finance fuels serious crime, including corruption and bribery, fraud and forgery, drug trafficking, human trafficking, tax evasion, and cybercrime, including online child sex exploitation, terrorism, and gang-related activity. I end my quotation. It is about all of that, Madam Speaker, that this legislation is seeking to create a protected legislative environment in which persons can feel confident to call the relevant agencies within the framework of this legislation, make reports, have those reports received, considered seriously, and have the confidence of knowing that they will be protected from retaliation and reprisal. And we have been in this government, Madam President, continuing in a suite of legislative activity to address precisely this area of financial corruption, precisely this area of corruption, precisely in order to create an environment and a society that encourages transparency. And this piece of legislation, which we come before this House with in 2024, which this government has brought to this Parliament now over a considerable period of time, is being argued and debated for in an attempt to persuade the opposition that they must support efforts to strengthen the legitimate pillars of integrity, transparency, and accountability in this society. And to listen to the member for Orpush East, I found it painful. I found it painful to understand that a member of that member's experience, pretending to be part of a legitimate exercise to further the interests of the citizens of this country who will need the protection of the legislative framework that we are asking this House to pass, I was truly saddened by the trivialization of everything that was said over those 40 minutes, in addition to his defending himself in his own case. Madam President, whistleblowing has been, Madam Speaker, I beg your pardon, Madam Speaker, whistleblowing has been acknowledged in conventions of which Trinidad and Tobago is part. We have signed on to them, we've ratified them, the two main international conventions, the Organization of American States Inter-American Convention Against Corruption, which I will refer to as the OAS Convention, and the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, the UN Convention. Those two conventions, Madam President, encourage state parties. Madam Speaker, beg your pardon a second time, and I will not err one more time, Madam Speaker. Those two conventions encourage state parties to consider incorporated international legislation appropriate measures to provide protection to persons who report in good faith, and that is the language in the legislation, and on reasonable grounds, any facts concerning offenses established in accordance with these conventions. And that is why we are back here today, Madam Speaker. This bill seeks to enhance and make more comprehensive earlier legislative attempts to meet our obligations. And they include other pieces of legislation which have attempted piecemeal to do this, but by this piece of legislation, we are seeking to give a holistic, comprehensive endorsement of the protection that persons who have information to provide will be afforded. The other previous bits of legislation are the Integrity in Public Life Act, the Data Protection Act, and the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Act, among others. We seek to make that more encompassing. And very briefly, Madam Speaker, because the history is important for things that I will speak to later, I will briefly outline some of the attempts made to enact this legislation. We have had the principles outlined in the bill taken from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development in their study on whistleblower protection. We had a comprehensive law reform research exercise done by the Law Reform Commission of Trinidad and Tobago, which has informed the policy behind the bill that was accepted by the Cabinet and led to the draft which we have brought here with the efforts of the Chief Parliamentary Counsel. The Whistleblower Protection Bill 2015 started in the House of Representatives on November 13, 2015. It was then referred to a Joint Select Committee for evaluation and report. 5 interim reports were produced following stakeholder consultation. The Whistleblower Protection Bill 2018 was then introduced on April 9, 2018 at the House of Representatives with the requirement that it be passed with a special majority, and I will come to that in due course. That bill was defeated on the 6th of May 2019, introduced again in 2019, this time as a Senate bill. However, that bill lapsed, and we've brought now the Whistleblower Protection Bill 2022, subsequently introduced in the House on the 14th of January 2022 by the operation of the standing orders. And this bill, like the others preceding it, Madam Speaker, aims to combat corruption and other wrongdoing by encouraging and facilitating disclosures of improper conduct in the public and private sector. The bill also seeks to protect persons from making disclosure from detrimental action and to regulate the receiving, investigating, or otherwise dealing with disclosures of improper conduct. Madam Speaker, the Honourable Prime Minister has gone through at some length the particular provisions of the bill, so that I'm not going to repeat all of that, and I will highlight really some of those which I consider to be of particular importance, particularly having regard to what I will say later in my remarks on the need or not for a special majority. So we have in the bill, in the definition section, the scope of disclosure as a term of art and improper conduct. Disclosure is defined in the bill as disclosure of information by a person which shows or potentially shows that improper conduct has occurred, is occurring, or is likely to occur. The bill does not seek to narrowly define or itemize types of conduct which a whistleblower can report. Instead, it utilizes the term improper conduct, which is also defined in the interpretation section. And improper conduct means A, criminal offense, failure to carry out a legal obligation, conduct that is likely to result in a miscarriage of justice, conduct that is likely to threaten the health or safety of a person, conduct that is likely to threaten or damage the environment, conduct that shows gross mismanagement, impropriety or misconduct in the carrying out of any activity that involves the use of public funds, acts of reprisal against or victimization of a whistleblower or person related to or associated with a whistleblower, conduct that tends to show unfair discrimination on the basis of gender, race, place of origin, social class, color, religion, or political opinion, or willful concealment of any act described in the preceding paragraphs. Madam Speaker, Part 2 of the bill deals with disclosure of improper conduct. So we have Section 7, enabling an employee of an organization to make disclosure of improper conduct within the organization to a whistleblower reporting officer or a whistleblowing reports unit of a designated authority. So we have within the structure of the bill the creation of organizations within entities that will responsibly receive, analyze, and act upon information that comes to them from a whistleblower. And the clause provides that a disclosure may be made either orally or in writing and must be based on an employee having reasonable grounds to believe that improper conduct has occurred, is occurring, or is likely to occur in the organization. And it should be noted that oral disclosures must be reduced into writing immediately in the presence of the person making the disclosure and read to the person who made it. An employee can disclose improper conduct in circumstances where the person to which the disclosure relates cannot be identified. The conduct had occurred prior to this act coming into force. The information came to his or her knowledge while being an employee, or the information relates to the improper conduct of someone who was employed by the organization. Clause 8 of the bill, Madam Speaker, specifies the 6 conditions that must be complied with for any disclosure to be protected. These conditions include A, it is made in accordance with the preceding clause to which I've just referred, Clause 7, it is made in good faith, and at the time of making the disclosure, the whistleblower reasonably believes that the information he or she has at the time is substantially true and shows his employer or person working for his employer's behalf engaging in or preparing to engage in improper conduct. And a principal requirement in most whistleblower protection across the world, which we have adopted, accepted, and repeated in this bill, is that the disclosure must be made in good faith. And I emphasize that because there is a balance that the bill accepts must be applied, and which balance will be assessed by the reporting units and the reporting officers to whom this information is being disclosed in order that it can then be acted on. In other words, it is intended to prevent the airing of vexatious, harassing, or frivolous disclosures. I emphasize that because I will come later on to talk to 2 terms of art: legitimate aim and proportionality. And those 2 terms of art have to do with a June 2022 decision of the Privy Council, which is very relevant to the question that will have to be determined by this House on submissions that will be made in due course as to whether this bill requires a 3/5 majority or a simple majority. Madam Speaker, moving on, and I'm not going to, as I said, deal with all of the clauses. Clause 11 mandates employers to appoint whistleblowing reporting officers to receive and process internal disclosures of improper conduct within a company or organization. And whistleblowing reporting officers would also determine whether an internal disclosure should be referred to a designated authority or through its whistleblowing reports unit for further investigation. So again, we strike the responsible role of the responsible officers conducting a proper sifting and balancing exercise of that which comes to them from whistleblowers. Clause 12, it is imperative that the implementation of whistleblower protection legislation is supported by awareness-raising, communication, training, and periodic evaluation of the effectiveness of the framework of protection. So the bill is ensuring that those persons and organizations involved in the exercise of enabling and protecting whistleblowers get continuous training in order that they can continue to function rationally, responsibly, and according to law. And Clause 12 requires an employer to establish and publish operational internal procedures for dealing with disclosures. And these internal disclosures procedures must identify the whistleblowing reporting officer. Clause 13 provides for that whistleblowing reporting officer within 30 days after receiving an internal disclosure to notify the whistleblower of the status of the disclosure. Clause 14 provides for the setting up of a whistleblowing reports unit in designated authorities. Clause 16 provides that where a whistleblowing reporting unit to whom a disclosure is made considers that the disclosure can be better processed by another whistleblowing reports unit, that disclosure can be referred to that other unit. Clauses 18 and 19 provide for the protection of whistleblowers, Madam Speaker. And this is important in the context of the very trivial remarks made by the member for Urupush East, in which he sought to dismiss the quality of this draft legislation here before this Parliament by way of a bill in order to give protection to persons who, with some trepidation, undertake the revealing of information that has come to their knowledge which troubles them as offending the law or in anticipation of an offense being committed. So Clause 18 of the bill safeguards a whistleblower from any detrimental action after making a protected disclosure, despite the existence of any prohibition or restriction on the disclosure of information under any written or rule of law, contract, oath, or practice. And following from that, Clause 19 grants to that whistleblower who has made a protected disclosure immunity from all criminal, civil, and disciplinary proceedings. And this immunity shall not be prejudiced where, in good faith, The whistleblower was mistaken about the importance of the disclosure, the perceived threat to the public interest has not materialized, or the whistleblower has not respected the procedural requirements of the Act or its regulations. Clause 20, whilst immunity is provided for in Clause 19, by Clause 20, however, a whistleblower who is himself or herself the perpetrator or accomplice to the improper conduct to which she or he is disclosing information shall have criminal proceedings.
Attorney General, your original speaking time is now spent. You're entitled to 15 more minutes to complete your winding up if you so wish. Yes, you may. Please
I
proceed.
would appreciate those further minutes. Thank you
Please
very
proceed.
much, Madam Speaker. And the court, in considering mitigating factors, shall consider the disclosure and its value to the investigation. The whistleblower can be subject to civil or criminal proceedings for conduct not related to the protected disclosure. In civil proceedings, the whistleblower who has acted as a perpetrator or accomplice to improper conduct and has been found liable for his conduct shall pay only part of the damage caused by him. And a whistleblower who is a perpetrator or accomplice and is employed by a public body should not be dismissed and should have his punishment mitigated following disciplinary proceedings. So different layers of protection are being provided for by this piece of legislation, anticipating the legitimate fear and trepidation of someone who finds themselves privy to information which they recognize either amounts to or has the potential to amount to the potential of something awry taking place, an offense being committed, and fears reprisal if they were to disclose that information to hold the person or the body to account. This legislation seeks to give them multi-layered areas of protection. And I could continue in much detail. There are offenses found in Part 4 of the bill. Clause 23 lists 5 offenses, Madam Speaker. Under Clause 24, the offense of disclosing the identity and statement or information of a whistleblower by a whistleblower officer or unit carries a penalty on summary conviction of a fine of $600,000 and imprisonment for 2 years. And there are other fines. Under Clause 25, the offense of obstructing a whistleblowing reporting officer carrying a penalty of $15,000 and imprisonment for 2 years. Let me turn, Madam Speaker, to the special majority requirement. This bill was introduced in January 2022, before the decision of Dominic Suraj, and states itself as requiring a special 3/5 majority because, and I'm quoting from the bill abrogates or authorizes the abrogation of the right of the individual to respect for his private and family life, inasmuch as the bill allows for A, the otherwise unlawful acquisition of personal or confidential information, etc., B, the disclosure of such information to whistleblowing, reporting officers, etc., C, the collection, processing, and sharing of such information, and D, the immunity of a person who unlawfully acquires personal or confidential information. Madam Speaker, the decision in Dominic Suraj refers to and relies on the earlier Surratt decision and poses 2 questions by which this bill would have to be examined. Does the limitation, such as it is on the fundamental right, pursue a legitimate aim? And secondly, is that limitation proportionate to that aim? And when we look across the globe at all of the material that has been produced on the need for whistleblowing protection, we are confident, and it is my intention to so advise, that there is a legitimate aim of this legislation to protect the body, the fabric of our society from the scourge of corruption that has been the subject of corruption indices for Trinidad and Tobago and other countries that rank this country at a relatively high level of corruption. And we know from our personal experiences the pervasive nature of corruption, such as it is, because it takes place undercover, under the bushels, away from the light and the sunlight of an illuminating sun, and it is eating away at the fabric of the society. So it will be my intention to advise the government, which I am proud and privileged to be part of, that this bill carries with it a sound, legitimate aim. And then is that limitation proportionate to that aim? And when we look at the privacy rights, and we ask ourselves the question, is that proportionate? When we look at the mechanisms that are built into the legislation, it will be my advice that the limitations are proportionate. And may I just say this, Madam Speaker, to read briefly a passage from the judgment of the Suraj decision, the $14.6 million judgment, which came after 51 attempts by the United National Congress to stop this government from keeping the citizens of this country safe during the pandemic. Paragraph 68 of the judgment says, a very large part of ordinary legislation passed by Parliament for good reasons of the public interest must inevitably interfere with or operate as restrictions on those rights. In the board's view, it is not plausible to suppose that the framers of the 1962 Constitution and the current Constitution intended to disable Parliament from taking ordinary legislative action in the public interest. The natural solution to accommodate the inevitable friction which always exists between individual fundamental rights and democratic decision-making in a constitutional liberal democracy like Trinidad and Tobago is that conventionally adopted so often in such states, namely to require that interference with such rights should be permitted in the public interest, but only if the interference is proportionate to a legitimate aim. And it is my confident advice, Madam Speaker, I beg your pardon, that we will be able to pass that test. And it would be a disservice on my part if I did not also acknowledge the judgment which was approved by Suraj of Mr. Justice of Appeal Beru in the case of Francis and the Attorney General on the same subject, when he says, it is long, Justice of Appeal Beru, paragraph 205 in that judgment. It is long accepted that because of the competent interests of a democracy, the rights conferred under sections 4 and 5 of the Constitution are not absolute, and to the extent that they existed prior to the Independence Constitution of 1962, never were. They must, for the most part, yield to the public interest. The public interest, I pause there to interpolate, of keeping this society safe from the ravages of undisclosed corruption, given to the members of the public the protection of the legislation so that they may disclose corruption which comes to them in the normal course of their lives from day to day. Continuing Justice Beru. Thus, not every limitation on a fundamental right by the legislature or the executive will necessarily amount to an infringement for the purposes of Section 14(1) of the Constitution. Consequently, it is not every restriction of a fundamental right which may require a Section 13 majority. There are other cases, Madam Speaker, but I am not going to belabor the point. And we will, of course, look at the statistics that demonstrate the legitimacy of the aim and the proportionality of the exercise that is being undertaken by this government as it comes to this honorable House to ask that this House pass this legislation in due course by a simple majority on the advice that I intend to give in due course. And with those few words, Madam Speaker, thank you very much.